Welcome back, guys. This is the continuation of our LinkedIn clone. In this video, we'll continue to use Ionic and Angular to lay out and build the UI of our home feed page in our LinkedIn feed. So as you can see, we've got this profile summary component here. We've got this start post component here. And we've got this more courses component here. And you can actually go ahead and you can click on start a post and it opens up this modal here. And if you type something into the post and post it, then it actually passes it back into the component and we get the post message that we posted. Now later this will be used to be sent to a database, and then we're going to render all the posts here. But in this video we're going to focus on the UI, and in a subsequent video we'll focus on the functionality behind this. And of course, if you haven't already seen the first video in the playlist, please click that. In that video we build this navigation bar and this popover component. Now this is a popover, and this is different to a modal. The popover is more just, it's usually used with the navigation bar to show some more extra links that you can click on. But the modal itself, it's actually passing data and it's centered here. So let's get started. So let's just open up our project, and we're in our LinkedIn folder for our front end project here. So what I'm going to start off by doing is I'm going to generate our components. So I'm going to run an Ionic generate component, and in the home module in our app, this is where we already have some existing components for the header. So I want to have in the home section in the components, I want to have the profile summary component. So I'll just call that profile summary. Build that. I also want the starting post component. So I'll generate that. And then we also want that advertising component on the side there. And finally we want the modal component. So I'm just going to call this modal, but it's going to be nested within the start post component. And I'm just going to call this modal. So now that we've generated our components, we just need to add them to our module here. So in our declarations, we can say we want our profile summary component, start post component, and the advertising component. Now you don't put the modal component here just yet because that's going to be rendered through the start post component through a modal controller with Ionic. However, it should be noted that when you start using forms, you will need to declare it. But if you declare it straight away, it would start to error. So now that we've set that up, let's just serve our application up to see where we're at. And this is opening on localhost port 8100. So as we can see in the previous video, we got our navigation bar with our popover controller. Now we want to start off by setting the background color for our entire application. So let's do that. If we go into our app component, into the SCSS file for our entire Ion app, we can set the background color. Now if you've added these to your theme variables, you can set it there, and that's probably a more scalable solution. But I'm just going to code it here. And now we can see we got that backdrop color. Now if we open the popover, we can see that there was actually this white background around our card. So what we want to do is we actually want to remove that. So if we go into our global SCSS files, when we did our custom class for our popover, and recall we had to do this globally because those components are they're not like the same as the components as in the traditional components. They're actually rendered outside of that scope, sort of to say. So recall in Ionic that there are a few CSS variables on the classes, and in addition to box shadow there's also a background, and this is in the documentation, and you can just say set background to none, and now when you open the component that background's no longer visible. So what we'll start by doing is we'll start by working on the profile summary component. So let's get the general shape for that up. So in our profile summary components, let's just start by adding an iron card. And I'll just say hi. And for our iron card, we actually want a width of 225 pixels. So let's see what, well, first we need to add that to the home page. So we go to the home page, and if we just below the header, we can add, let's add a container here with the class content container, and we can actually bring in our app profile summary component. I'm also going to bring in the start post component and the advertising component, just so we can get the general shape of the layout ready. So right now, notice that it's down the bottom here, and that's because Ionic is having this ion page, and there's some flex properties preset, and it's using the justify between in the vertical direction to space the elements or the components evenly across the page. However, we want to adjust this such that these components are up the top of the page. So I'm just going to get the shape of the card. So in the the start post component, I'm also going to add a width here. So I'm just going to copy this from here. And I should actually just add two more properties here because I'm going to copy these over, and they'll save some duplication. Of course, you're able to factor this box shadow and border out into the global styling if you want to keep things a little cleaner than I am here, but we'll come back to refactoring in another video perhaps. So this class I can copy over, and this is going to be an iron card as well. Hello. And the start post component, now this is going to look similar, except it's going to have a different width. It's going to have a width of 525 pixels, and I've just found these widths just by inspecting the elements in the DOM of from the LinkedIn page. And of course we want another iron card here. Say hello, and here Now in this case the width, this one's going to be 315. Okay, so we've got 3 cards and they're vertically aligned, and they're also all the way down the bottom here on the page. So if we come to, so let's just close these because we won't be working on these just yet. But if we come to the home page, we have this container div for all of our components. So let's go ahead and let's just add that into our SCSS file here so we can lay it out. Now, one thing that we're doing is in the app component, we're actually rendering this Ion app component. So that means since we're rendering it like that with an Ion router outlet inside here, what we want to do is we can't target the home page directly, but what we can do is we can actually say for the host of this element, so it's referring to the home component where it's hosted, which is rendered through the app router outlet. What we can do here is we can just say we can justify the content because flex is already applied, and then we can say start, so it brings the content to the start or the top of the column, so there's no that extra space between. And we can just go ahead and we can make this display flex for our container, so that'll make it a row, and we can say width of 1128 pixels. Now that's the same width as our container that we had on our navigation bar, and of course we're just building for desktop for now. We'll refactor to a mobile view in a later video, but we do need to start somewhere and we just get the general layout going. And it's easier to start from desktop to mobile in this particular application because essentially the desktop has extra components and they just get removed in the mobile view, so it's easier to work that way around. Ionic is for hybrid applications, so you can use it for both web applications and mobile, and sometimes you'll target mobile first, but you really just have to take a look at the requirements of your project. That isn't just set in stone. But we can just add some margin there as well. So what this will do is now we will get our layout of our columns, and if we make it bigger we get that spacing, so it caps there in line with the navigation width. So let's just reduce that a little. So okay, so we've got our layout set out, so let's just start working on this first profile component here. So I can close this home page down, both the HTML and CSS files, and we can start working on the profile summary component. So we're going to start off by, right at the top of the LinkedIn there's a backdrop, and that's where the color is behind the profile picture, that rectangular color with 3 colors. So I'm just going to make a backdrop here, a div, and that's going to contain 4 other divs. And the first one we'll just call background 1. Now the second one is going to be, there's actually this like little circular arc next to the first rectangular background color, so we can just add this class here. We'll just call it half ellipse. It's more of an ellipse shape. And then we can have background 2, and then we can have background 3. So this ellipse actually goes into this background 1, merges in with it. So let's just start with that. So if I come to the profile summary SCSS file, we can say for the backdrop, now we want the height of that to be 54 pixels, we want it to be displayed flex, so it's in a row by default. And we can say for the background 1, we want a certain background color. Now these aren't in my theme variables, these are just one-off colors, so I'm just going to hard code them here. You may want to refactor this into your main stylings. And I basically got the colors and widths by inspecting the elements on LinkedIn in Google Chrome, but you can just copy these in here. Now you have to set the height to 100%, otherwise there'll be no height. Now I can go ahead and I can copy this for background 2 and background 3. So background 2, that's just going to be 27 pixels, and the color is going to be BB, E7, E9, and background 3 is just going to be 25 pixels with the hex code color of BF, D3, D6. So let's just save that and see what that gives us. Okay, so it's not, if you're looking very closely, you can see that there's about 3 pixels here that's missing, and I'm actually just going to add another element here that's 3 pixels in width, and there's actually this circular part here on this main backdrop color. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that in. We've got the half ellipse class here, so let's just go ahead and copy that class name, and we can just put it here after the background 1 because it merges in with it. Now we can actually copy some of these properties here, except we want the width to be only 3 pixels here. And we also want a border radius. So this is the distinguishing difference. Border radius. And we don't want any radius on the left, and we just want the top and bottom to take 100%. And to make the curvature on the right hand side, we need to do this sort of 0/50% curvature. So let's see what this gives us. So we save that, and we can now see that this third color has been pushed over, but there's this slight gap between the first and second color. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add this background color of the second element, and I'm going to add this to the backdrop. So now we can see we've got this slight curvature here. So the next thing that we'd want to work on is getting this circular profile image with the white border around it centered such that it's overlapping half of this backdrop. So let's go to our profile summary HTML, and below this backdrop container, but still inside the card, we want this iron card header, and it's going to have a class of iron text center, and these classes just come from the utility methods in the documentation. And we choose to use an iron avatar with our iron image, so that just rounds it. And our iron avatar, we want it to be centered in the middle there, so we're just going to have this class iron margin auto, and of course our image, it needs a path, and we do have our profile image in our assets as saved from the navigation video where we have our profile image there. So we just need to find that, so we just need to go back a few directories into our assets, and this is where I have the profile image. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, so we've got our image, but it's not quite where we want it. So let's use some styling to align that. So if we go to our iron card header, we can say we can have some margin top of -54 pixels. That will bring it up vertically more than it would be normally. And for our iron avatar, we want the width to be 72 pixels, the height to be 72 pixels. We want it to be centered, so margin auto. Now we want a white border around it, so we can say border 2 pixels solid. And here I'm just going to use one of the global styling from the styles, global in the theming styles, and I'm just going to use iron color primary contrast. And you typically want to use these variables so you don't have to go back if you make any color changes, but for these one-off colors, I'm just going to hard code these here. Ideally you would add it there, but for something that's just a one-off and I know the scope of the project, it's not too serious. And let's see what this gives us. So we can see that we get this iron avatar and it's taking up the center. It's hard to see here, but if you look very closely, sometimes you can see a bit of a background color between the border and the image. So to offset that, I'm actually just going to add some box shadow on the inside of that. So we can say inset. Now this is going to be 0 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels, and then 10 pixels to get a little bit of spread going in there. And once again, I'm going to use the same color as this, such that there's no gaps between the image and the border of the image. So that's lined up there. So next we need the profile name and subtitle. So we can actually come back to our template here, and still inside of our header but below the ending tag of the avatar, we can have our iron card title, and this is going to have a class of iron margin top, and then I'm also going to have an iron card subtitle. So let's get those in. So for the iron card title, and this shouldn't actually be nested, sorry, this is a separate element, but for this iron card title, I'm just going to hard code a name here. Later we'll add some real data in here, so I'm just going to put my name, and we can put the role, so full stack developer. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, so we got this here. So now we need our iron card content. So let's go here. Iron card content. And we're going to have a div, and we're going to have a span, and then we're also going to have a iron text, and this is going to be, we should have 2 of these. So basically we're going to start to say who viewed your profile, and then I'm going to say that 467 people viewed the profile, and this is going to have that blue color on that. So I'm just going to say primary here, and actually I'm just going to copy this line here so I can get that color again, and I'll just change this to 678 connections. And then I'm just going to have this iron card subtitle with the property color equal to dark, and I'm going to add the text manage your network. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, so we just need to space the span and iron text such that they're spaced between. So let's just add that styling. So if we go back to our profile summary component, the styling file, we can just say, well, our iron card content, our div, we want that to have a display of flex, and we want to justify the content so it's spaced between. Okay. Now we do want just a little bit of spacing between who viewed your profile and connections. So I'm just going to add into the profile summary component on the span of the connections, or actually the div of the connections. I'm going to say class equals connections, and then we can take this class and we can say for the connections, we can just say we can add a margin top of 8 pixels. So let's just save that. Okay, great. So we've got a basic layout for our profile summary component. Let's move on to the advertising component. And just before we move on, we want a divider. So we want a line to separate our header from our content. So what I'm going to do is in the profile summary component, between the header and the iron content here, I'm just going to have a div here, and I'm going to call it item divider. And this is actually going to be used in a few places. So rather than define it in the component, I'm going to define it in our global SCSS file here. So this is just going to be called item divider, and all it's going to be is just going to be a bottom of 1 pixel solid, and it's going to be like a lighty grey sort of color. So it's going to contrast the white navigation background with the grey backdrop. So it's going to be a color sort of in between those, well, to highlight those. So there's this iron color light tint here, and if we check that out, we can see that we got this nice divider here. So let's move on to the advertising component. So let's just close down our profile summary component and open the template and the styling sheet for that. So we've got our iron card here. Let's go ahead and delete its contents of hello and add some real contents to it. Get our card looking nicely. So once again, we can use the header, iron card header. And inside here, I want an iron text. And I want to have a H5 here. And this is just going to say today's most viewed courses. And next to that, but still inside the iron text, we want to have an iron icon, and we want that to have the name attribute or property, and that's going to be information. And I think it should actually be like this inside the brackets, so I'm able to get my IntelliSense using Emmet. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, so we can see that it brings it onto the next line. So what we can do is we can say for our iron card header, for our iron text, we can say display equals to flex, and the justify content is equal to space between. So inside of our iron text, we do have that iron icon, so we can nest the class or the element of the Ionic component or the selector, and we can say, well, we don't want it to be just the icon, we want to give it a background color, and we can choose one of our global variables here. So we can say the iron color medium shade, and for the color of the icon I want to use the iron --iron because it's a global CSS variable, color dark contrast, and I want the border radius to be of 4 pixels. I want a slight rounding of the icon, and also for the H5 I want the font size to be a little smaller, and I want the font weight to be a little heavier, so I'll make that 600, and I don't want any margin top, so I'll set that to 0. So let's save that. So we can see that didn't work because this should actually be iron icon. So now we get that roundedness, and we can see that it's lined up and there's the space between it. So that's going to be the title for our header. Now let's continue building the rest of this component here. And I might also just add a little bit of padding bottom in anticipation for the next element being rendered right underneath, sort of thing. So we just need to have our card content now, and this card content is going to be below our header. And we're going to start off by having some iron text with the color attribute equal to dark, and we're also going to have a H6, and I'm just going to have a class on this first one to be able to distinguish it from the second and third ones, because for layout reasons. So this first one here, I'm just going to say the course is called High Performance Habits, and below this H6 but still and outside of this iron text here, I want to have a P tag, and I'm just going to have the author name. So I'm going to have John Doe, and John Doe, he's an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur, and yeah, let's just see what this gives us. Actually, I may as well, this is pretty easy, so I might just duplicate this 3 times, this iron text here. Now I don't need this class, I can just do a Control D to get the second one and backspace that, and the color is going to be the same, but I'm just going to change the title, of course. So this is just going to be Leadership 101, and this can be by Jane Smith, and let's just say she's a leader. Now the third course we're going to have here is going to be called the Psychology of Success. And this is by Homer Thomas. Of course, these names are just made up. Unless there's a crazy coincidence or something going on here. But let's just say Homer Thomas. Let's say he is a psychologist. PSY, psychologist. So, and let's just see what this is giving us. So we can see that we've got the list here, but there's a bit too much spacing. We want things to be a little closer, and we also just want a little button at the bottom here. So let's work on that. So let's say below this Homer Thomas, psychologist, author, we can say we want an iron button, and we can just give it a color of medium and a size of small and a fill of clear, and these properties are all in the documentation for iron button. Yep. So we're just going to say view all recommendations here, and in addition to that, we're also going to have an iron icon, and we'll just put a class on it. So there's a bit of padding between the icon and this wording, and we'll just make that dark, and the icon is going to have the name of arrow forward, and we'll get the outline version. So let's save that. So we've got this button here, so let's just align things a little better. So we'll come to the styling, and for our iron card content, our iron text, now recall I added this class here for the first course, and that's because I want spacing for everything that's not the first course. So on our iron text for the H6 element, we can say everything that isn't the first course, give it a margin top of 8 pixels, because obviously there's too much margin there already. And our H6 by itself, we'll make it have a slightly higher weighting. So rather than the default of 400, we'll give it 500. And our P tag, we can just give it a margin left of 16 pixels here. Okay. So we also want to have a couple more global stylings. So one thing you will notice is this button is uppercase. So let's get that sorted. So we can come to our global styles here, and we can say the iron buttons, we want the text transform to be initial. So we'll save that. And now we can see that this is lowercase. And one thing you probably caught, this should not be iron card header, this should be iron card content. And I've got a plugin that, or extension that auto fills out the closing tag. So now we can see that it's lined up nicely here. So everything's lined up, we've got that component sorted, and we've got this button with lowercase. So now we can begin to work on this start post component here. And this is going to have two parts to it. There's going to be the layout of the initial component, and then there's going to be the controller that we're going to inject as a service to that component. So let's start there. So we can open those up, start post component, and we can close the other advertising component now. So let's just open up the start post component and we'll start to build out the card. So there's going to be an iron card header, and in there we're going to have an iron avatar with an iron image. This iron image, the source, is going to be the same file, and of course this is just hard coded for now. We can go to our assets folder and we can get our profile picture. After that, we're going to have that long circular button. So below the avatar here, we can say we want an iron button and we want it to be rounded. So we have this shape equals rounded property we can add here. We also have fill, and we want that to be an outlined one, and we can just make the color the medium color. Inside of our iron button, we want to have a span with the class iron text left, because by default the buttons are actually the text is centered, so we need to offset that, but we'll add that soon. So we can say start a post, and let's just see what that gives us. Okay, so we want to move that up and we want to change some of the layout there. So let's go to the start post component styling, and for the iron card header we just want to make it a row, so we can display that as flex. And then we have the iron avatar, and we just want to change the width of that to 48 pixels and also the height. So let's do that. And for the button in the iron card header, the iron button, and of course you could refactor this using SCSS if you like, but we can make the border width 1 pixel. I'm not making everything perfect here, just so I can get the general layout, and then we'll come back to refactoring later on perhaps. And then we can just get the height equal to 48 pixels. So it's going to be the same as the image, the circular image for the avatar. And it's just going to fill the rest of the width. So we'll just say it's going to be 100% of its container. And we just want to have a little bit of spacing between that and the icon, the profile image icon. So we'll just say we'll have a margin left here of 16 pixels. And let's save that. Now notice that this is still centered, even though we've added the class iron text left on our span. We do need to adjust it such that for that iron text left, it has a margin right of auto. So the text is left, but the margin on the right is pushing things over. So let's make that auto. And now we see we've got that lined up to the left there. And we've got that nice ripple effect for the button. So now we just want to add a little bit of extra options here below. And we know that from before that we want the card content to be flex. So we'll just display the content that we're about to add as flex with a justify content of space between. So now if we come back to our header, in our iron card and our iron card header, next to that, the next adjacent sibling to the header, we can have an iron card content, and we can have an iron button with an iron icon and an iron text adjacent to that. So we'll make our button of the color medium, and we'll give it a fill equal to clear. Now these icons, they're in the LinkedIn, they're all different colors, and I've selected my styling, in my theming in line with these colors. Whether that's the best approach or not is another question, but since I'm focusing on what I'm focusing on, I know what colors I need to use. Otherwise you can just hard code them to whatever you want, or add them to your theming file directly if you have particular colors in mind. But since this is a LinkedIn clone, I'm going to use something close to the LinkedIn colors. And the first thing is an image icon. So there's this image outline of the color secondary. And in the iron text here, I'm just going to say photo. So I'm actually able to copy these down 3 times, because we're also going to have a video, event, and write article icon. So if I go to the name or the color of the video, we want the video to be green, so we can just use the success color, and that should be on the icon itself, because we want the icon to be colored, but then we want this gray medium sort of hover effect there. And this icon, this is play sharp, and all the icons there can be found on the documentation. If you go to the UI components in Ionic, then you can just look for icon, and then another pop-up will come up with all the icons. But I've already pre-selected these. So for the event, we want that to be a red, so we'll just use the warning color here. And the event, we want it to be in calendar, so we'll just use the calendar outline here. And finally, for our newspaper, and actually this warning's a yellow color, we want the write an article to be the red color, and that's danger actually. And rather than image outline, we can have a newspaper outline. So let's see where we're at with that. Alright, great. We've pretty much laid out that. You can see that we've got our colored icons and then the medium gray sort of buttons. So what I want to do now is I want to add our modal component and hook it up with this component. So we want to click this button, we want a modal to appear, we want to lay it out of course, and then we want to be able to send some data back from the modal to this main component here. And then a subsequent video will use that data, and we can outline all of the post here. But to do that, we're actually going to have to go into the TypeScript here, because we're going to need to inject the component. So let's just close this up, and we can close this app component up. So let's open our modal component, and then let's also open the TypeScript up for the modal component. Actually, there's not going to be that much in there, but there's going to be some in the start post component. So the way we do this is the start post component, it needs to be aware of the modal component. So you do actually need to reference it. And then in Ionic there is a modal controller as well that helps out with the functionality of this. So we can just go ahead and we can just make a public modal controller of the type modal controller, and this should just bring it in from Ionic Angular. And we also want to present the modal. So when you click on something in the TypeScript, basically you're going to click on the not that button, but this button here. So when you click on this button here, basically what you want to do is you want to present the modal. So I'm just going to call this present modal, and it's great that we're getting some template errors here because we haven't actually created that yet. So let's go ahead and create that. So we can say for the present modal, we want that to be like that. So, and this is actually going to be an async because there's going to be an asynchronous operation here, and namely for the constant modal, what we want to do is we want to await this modal controller that we've injected, and this actually takes, well, there's a bunch of methods here, but we need to create the modal before we can dismiss it. So we create the modal, and as a configuration option, it takes an object and then it references which component you're actually using. If you want data from the start component to go into the modal, you can actually have this thing called component props, but we won't need this just yet. So I just thought I'd mention that. Now it also takes a CSS class here, and I'm just going to call this my custom class 2, and I'm going to add this my custom class 2 to the global styling, and I've named it that just because like the popover one's called my custom class. I could call it something else, but I'm just going to add it here for now so I don't forget about it, and we'll come to sign that in just a moment. But essentially, now that we've created this modal, what we'll do is, and we're waiting for that to happen, so that waits for that rather than continuing this operations. So for that modal, we actually want to present it, and that's just going to open it up for us. Now what we can do here is, this is going to happen when you close the modal. So if you click off the modal, and we're also going to configure it so you can click the X button, and that's a different role. You're either clicking the backdrop or you're clicking the modal itself. So the role that can be taken using object destructuring, and you need to wait for the model to close, and there's actually a method called onDidDismiss here, and that just takes the data that you need when you close it. So you open the modal, and then it opens the modal component up, and if there's some data associated with that, or the role that got set for dismissing that, will be made available here. And basically, let's just do a console log, and I'm just going to say what am I going to say? I'm just going to say 7 roll. So let's save that. Let's save that. Now if I click on here, now I'm getting an error here. And the error is stemming from the fact that this component should not be modal controller, it should be modal component. So let's save that. Now if we click on this button, we get our modal, and it comes up nicely and it says modal work. And then if we click off somewhere, we get the role backdrop. That's the role that dismissed the event. So we also want one here that has an X on it, and we also want one when we click on the post later on. So there's 3 different roles that we're using here. So let's start to get into that. So I'm just going to go back to the component to start to lay it out a little bit. And we are pretty much done with the start post template for now. So let's start building the modal component up. Now, I mentioned before that there's going to be some global styling, and recall that the global styling for these pop over or modal components, they need to be done in the global file, and that's because due to the scoping, because you're dynamically rendering those through the injection in the service, you need to actually define those styles globally. You can define some of them in the component itself, but I'm just going to go ahead and define the core ones that we'll need. So I'm basically going to make the width 552 pixels. Again, the dimensions are just from me inspecting the browser. And notice that we've got this CSS variable here for height and width. They're in the documentation of the bottom of the modal component for preset CSS variables. Now, because we made the height 400 pixels, we want to also make the margin top negative 400 pixels, and this is just going to bring it up to the top because we don't want the modal to be in the center. We want it to be closer to the navigation bar, where the top of it meets the bottom of the navigation bar, or thereabouts. And I'm just going to add a couple of things in anticipation for what I'm about to build, and that is the iron grid that I'm going to use to lay out the modal component. I don't want any margin on that, and you do have to add it here. You can't add this in the component itself due to the bespoke reasons. But we can add the padding bottom here of 0, and we can also just have an iron text area, because we're going to have a text area for the input, and we're just going to set that padding to top because there's going to be a bit of extra space there by default. Oh, I have to use a semicolon, sorry. So 0. And all else I really need in this global style sheets before I can close it for now is having the iron button. So the iron button, so when the text inside an iron button, we just want a little bit of spacing on the left hand side there, so it's not tugged up all the way to the left. And I'm just going to use 8 pixels here. So I can close these style sheets up, and we can start to work on our modal component, working on the template here. So I'm going to have a div surrounding the whole thing, so there's a container there, and inside the first div we're going to have a class, and we're going to call it heading, and we're also just going to give it some of the custom, some of the built-in padding, so ion padding will be added there. Then we'll have an iron text, and we'll just say create a post. We'll have an iron button, and this will have the size of small, color equal to dark, a fill of clear, a shape equal to round, and inside of this button we're going to have our iron icon, and it's just going to have a slot of icon only, because this is the X in the top right, guys, and it's going to have a size of large, and the name of this icon here is just the close outline. And then I'm just going to use that global HR, or the item divider that we made to make the spacing. And then below, and let's just see what this gives us. before we get too far ahead of ourselves. So basically we've got this cross here. So I want to line up the styling so this is a little laid out a little better. So let's come to the styling. So okay, so the styling of the actual modal itself, like the height and the width, that can't be defined in the styling here. But when you got things like, for example, more specific things, you can actually change that in the styling. And if you're not sure, you can just sort of try things out. Like for example, there's this heading here. I can have styling for the heading scoped here, but I can't have things like the actual, the actual class height or like the actual top of that. So just be aware of that difference. So basically, in our modal component for our heading, we can add that class here, and we just want the font size to be a little bit bigger, so we'll just make that 24 pixels, and we'll display the heading as flex, so we can use the justify content of space between, so the X is on the very right there, and we just want to align the items vertically so they are centered, and that should be align items. And for the iron button that's nested within the heading, we just want to say we want the padding to be 0 here. So yep, that looks a little better, yep. So let's go back to our modal component into the template, and just below the item divider here, this is where we're going to add our iron grid with an iron row and an iron col. So on our grid, we just want some padding there, and that utility method gets used a fair bit, the iron padding. Then we want to have our iron row. So our iron row, we just want to align our iron justify content start, and our iron col is just going to have a size of auto, and then we're going to have this iron avatar nested in here. So I'm doing the same sort of approach as I did in the navigation bar, where we put the image into a column, and then we put the text into a column such that the image is on the left and the text is on the right. So for our iron image, let's just go ahead and we'll source that, so we'll just find that. So we'll just go back a couple directories, and we'll go back one more to assets to get our profile picture. So in the next iron col, what we're going to add here is we're just going to add a div here, guys, and we're also going to nest in this iron text here, and I'm just going to put John Pepink here for the name, and below this we're just going to say iron button. So we want an iron button, and we want an iron icon, and also an iron text, and also another iron icon, all in this button. So we want the iron button itself, we want that to have a size of small, and we want it to be rounded, so we'll add this shape of round. We want it to be of the type fill, so it has that border outline, and we also want the color to be that medium grayish color, so we'll just add medium there. On the icon, we're just going to add the color equal to dark, and we're going to copy that for the second icon. And we're just going to have the name. So there's that little globe symbol. So we'll just say globe outline. And this iron text, this is just going to say anyone. And this iron icon is going to have the name equals caret down outline. So let's just see what that gives us. We've made a bit of progress here. So we open our navigation bar and we see that we've got our column here for the image, the column here for the name, and also we got this button here. So we do just want to style this a little further. So what I'm going to do here is on the iron text, I'm just going to add this class here. And it can say it says anyone for now, but it could say things like friends only or something like this. So I'm just going to call this the view status class so we can access that. And if we come to our styling here, so we've got our iron grid, and inside our iron grid we've got an iron button, and we just want to make the border width, guys, we just want to make that 1 pixel, and we want to change the height so it's 30 pixels, and the width, so it's 112 pixels. And these are just hard coded, these are just found from the actual LinkedIn website through inspecting the DOM. But the icon nested within the button, I just want to change the size a little bit, just tweak things a little bit, make it a little cleaner. So we'll make the font size 14 pixels, and that view status class that we just added, we just want to let it have a little bit more spacing there, so none in the vertical direction, but we'll add 6 pixels in the horizontal direction, so the spacing between the icons. So let's save that. And alright, so it's just spaced a little nicer here, and there's a little bit of spacing between here and here. And the height and the width is changed as well. So what we want to do now is we just want to add, well, we want to add a form, because we're going to have some text area, and then we want our buttons below that to submit. And we're actually going to nest it all into one. So I'm just going to add the form here for now, and this is below the iron grid, and it needs to be a form so that we can use a template driven form here. And because we're going to use a template driven form, basically we will need to declare this in the module now. But just before I add the submit methods and stuff like that, I'm just going to lay the thing out. So I'll add it to the module in just a sec. But yeah, we want this iron padding, so it's consistent with the iron padding in the grid above it. And we're going to have this iron text area. Now this iron text area, now there's no slot in the middle of it, but we're going to make the rows equal to 5 by default, and we're just going to have this placeholder here, and it's just going to say, what do you want to talk about? That's what it says on LinkedIn, and the type is just going to be text here, and the name is going to be body. When we use ng model, we'll have to declare it, but we'll add that soon, and we'll just say that this is required. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, so we've got our element here. Great. So notice we can't close it here just yet. We'll add that functionality soon, but we can still click off here to get the backdrop role that closed it. So this iron text area, below the iron text area, this is where we're going to start to just work on our UI a little further to show all the buttons that you can add. So I'm just going to add this iron button with the property fill equal to clear. And this is just going to say add hashtag. So let's see that. So by default we get that primary color, that blue there. Add hashtag. Now we're going to have all of our action items. So we're going to make a div here with the class action items. So we can do some targeted styling here. And let's just get that. And then we're going to wrap all of those in another div. So we can have our iron buttons laid out. So let's say iron button. And we'll set the size equal to small. Shape equal to round. Color equal to dark. Fill equal to clear. And then inside of the iron button, we're going to have an iron icon. And this is going to have a class of iron padding none. And it's also going to have this slot of icon only, and that's just to tell the button that there's no text in there, it's just the icon. So it just lays it out slightly differently. And this is just going to be an add icon here. So we can more or less duplicate this. So let's just duplicate it, because our next the next button that we want is just going to be an image outline. So image outline, and I can actually copy this 3 more times here. And this image, this third one here, this is just going to be play sharp. So these are all the icons that I chose before. Now I'm going to have also the calendar outline. It's just rather than being colored, they're slightly different in appearance. And this last icon here, this is not going to be an icon only, so I'll remove that property there. But instead, it's going to have an iron text component. And that's just going to have this class here of view status. And I'm just going to say anyone here. And this is actually going to be the chat box ellipsis outline. So let's just save that and see where we're at. So we've added our icons in here. Now we just want to do some slight styling of that. So for our styling, for our action items, just want to display flex, justify content with space between, and we want to align the items centrally. And this view status, if you look into our global styling, so we got the styling applied to the actual modal itself and the Ionic, the core like text area and ion grid, and then you know, we got this iron button with iron text with the marginal left set there. So I'm not sure if I actually need this view status. Let's just see what we got now. Okay. So actually we do need view status. That's in two areas for the so it's on the anyone text here, and that's both in the both view modes. And this appears like it doesn't work, this action items yet, the display flex, but that's because we haven't added the next part to our modal and the final part to the modal. And this is actually going to be the iron button. And we're actually just going to give it a class of iron margin. And because it's got that margin, then we need to line things up using flex. So this is just going to say post here. And now we're going to add our form logic. So this iron button, basically you're not going to be able to click it unless the form's all good. So we're going to say if the form is not valid, and also that the type is submit. And since we need to define the form using a template reference variable, and we need to add some properties to see if it's valid or not. So just, you know, is it there or not, basically. And then we have this type of submit, so we can tell the form that we're in that it's actually a where's the form? The form can use the ng on submit when you click that submit button. So let's go there. So first things first, we need to make this a form. So we can use this template variable here, and then we use ng form. Now if we save this, okay, it compiles, but if we say submit equals on post, and notice it has this required here, so that means if the if it's not so it does an error until you actually click on it, but it says ng form is not found. So we need to go to our home module where we use this particular modal, and now we can add our modal component, and it won't error, or it shouldn't error. Because now we have a relationship with the form. So if there's no form and no data being passed between the two components, the modal and the components that's consuming it, and then the provider, it doesn't need to be, or the component doesn't need to be declared, but we do need to declare it when we use it in this scenario with the data. So now we can define this on post, and basically we've defined form. It has this template variable form of the type ng form, so we're able to communicate this from the template to the component in the TypeScript, and that means on our iron input, where's that? Oh yeah, our iron input here. So we've got our rows, our placeholder, our type, but we're also going to need this ng model attribute here, this property here, and this is required. So for our form template, we're able to bind that to the template, and because we've defined our button as a submit type, we can, when we click this button, assuming that it's a valid form, so it's going to be disabled or grayed out if the form's not valid, but if the form is valid, meaning that this required is present for our input elements bound by the ng model, we can submit that because it has the type submit on that button, and then we can use this ng submit, and this will make the template, this will call the TypeScript that's going to render this. So let's just closely with nothing in it but a console log. So I'm just going to say 8 here and then save this. Now if I open this up and I close it, I get backdrop. But notice this is grayed out, I can't click on this. But if I type something in and then click post, then we get our 8. Now we also want it to close, and same with the close. We want those both to close. And I might make this post go on the right here too. So I'll just get that going first. And basically what we've got here in our template is we've got a div, and then we've got our action items, and then there's a div around all the action items. And I want all those, I want the iron button to be outside of that. So the post button is unique compared to the other action items. It's still technically an action item, so you might want to name the variable differently, but when I'm referring to action item, I'm referring to the LinkedIn action items rather than the posting functionality action. So yeah, that makes it go on the right here. And yep, so now we want to work on the close and the post. So let's start with the close. So basically when we close it, so on this iron button here, we want to have a click event on this button, and we want to have on dismiss, because when we dismiss it, we want to do something. So I'm going to add this here on dismiss, and in this method here, I want to access the modal controller. So how can we access the modal controller from in the controller? So we've got the start component. It references the modal controller from Ionic, and then it waits for this, and then it looks at that modal component, and Ionic knows that it's referenced this modal component. So that means if we go in here and we inject the public modal controller of the type modal controller, what we can do is we can actually you call the dismiss method using that controller. So the modal controller, it has in its memory the relationship between this component and the component that's calling it. So we're able to dismiss that. Now dismiss it, you don't have to put anything in here. But the first variable, you don't want undefined data being passed to your components. We can just say this is null, and then we have the name of the role. So when we click the dismiss button, it means it's been dismissed. So we'll just put this dismissed here. So we'll save that, and then we'll save that. So we'll just wait for our app to load, and then when it loads, before we couldn't close, but now we can close, and now we get our 7 and dismiss. So where's that 7 and dismiss coming from? Well, we are passing no data back, and then we have this dismiss method here. But if we go to our start component, recall when we presented the modal, we have an asynchronous operation, so we're not sure when they're going to close it, but we do await for the closing of the modal to be dismissed. And when it is dismissed, that's when we can get the data. So see this data here, this modal controller dismiss, there's data and then there's a role, and then this is put into like an object behind the scenes. So we're able to destructure the role from the on div dismiss component. And we can also get the data from the on div dismiss component, and basically we may as well log out the data as well. So I might just slightly change this to role and data. And you can do things in here, like if the data exists or doesn't exist or something like that. And I'll just show an example of that. So when we wait for that, we can just say if data exists, we can console log, and we can console log data exists. And that should be a comma here. So let's go into here. Now we can close as per usual. So we get undefined here, and we get no data exists. Now that's the standard there. But if we were to do our method, where we click close here, we get dismiss data and null. So rather than undefined, we get null. And basically, it doesn't really matter if it's null or undefined, because it's probably preferable to be null, but they both are nullish, so they're coalesced into a null, like false, basically, because it's a nullish type. So this console log data exists does not run. But we have our dismiss method. So now we can go and we can make our onPost method. So recall that it needs to meet the validation requirements from our template driven form. And if the form is valid, i.e. there is at least one string or character in the text area field, then this disabled will no longer be true. And then we can use our submit to call the ng on submit using the form. And then that data from the form is bound through ng modeling, so it's accessible into our TypeScript. So recall that we labeled the form. So all we really need to do is we just need to view child, and we need to get the form, and we'll just call it form here. And this is of the type ng form, and we grab that in from Angular forms. So now we can start to build up on our onPost. So basically, since we have access to form, we have access to the form methods. So basically, if the form, if it's not valid, we just want to return. So we don't actually want to post the data here. And there's checks on the front end and the back end here. But we can just say we want to get the body or the text, and this is just going to be equal to this form value, and we look for body, because on our iron text area we have the name of body. Then we want to dismiss. So we post the data and everything's successful. When we click post, we want the data to be closed, the modal to be closed. So what we can do is we can access this modal controller, and we can go ahead and we can dismiss it. And as the first argument here, we can have the data. So we're going to have the post, and in the post we're going to have the body. And I don't have to do body colon body, because we can just use the ES6 sort of version. So this is equivalent to this, but we'll set the body equal to body, and we're also going to have this created at, and we're going to call this new date, and that's just going to be the date now. And rather than having this dismiss chord here for the role type, what we'll do as the second parameter, we'll just call this post. So now if we click on our modal and I say something, what do you want to talk about? Something. I can now click the post modal. Now we get this data exist here, because we are actually getting some data back. in addition to the role. So that we get that, and then we get the console log of the role and the data itself. And the data that's being sent back from the modal component when it's being dismissed is the post body and created at from the form, the template driven form. And we can see that we get the post, the role is post, and then the data is the data, and the data we defined as the object post, and that has the body, so that's the body text we typed in, something, and then we get created at, and for me I get the time right now, so I created it right now. And that pretty much wraps up this video. So in the next video and the following videos, what we want to do is we want to set up the actual functionality to get this data from this component, and we want to actually display all of the posts here. So if you like this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and continue on with this LinkedIn series. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Cheers.